Okay, folks, it's just about the top of the hour, and we're going to get rolling. Thank you for joining us on the second installment of Search Engine Optimization for the August training for the Making Headlines 18. As always, we invite questions in the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner. We will try to get to them as often as possible, but if not, we promise to get you an answer on anything by the end of the day. If you were part of the first training presentation last week, you know there's a ton of tips and tricks and fun things to learn, so please feel free to reach out. David Stone is again here at the Center for News and Design in Austin with us. He is the Senior Manager of Search Strategy and also Content Distribution, which is quite a mouthful. He works out of the Austin American Statesman building. He was previously with the Cox Media Group, which is, of course, the Atlanta and Palm Beach and also Dayton, Ohio, as well as Austin. Has helped them for years, and he will show us some of the stuff that they did over the years. And today's agenda, which we'll talk through in just a second, 5 tips. And it's interesting, David and I talked about this beforehand. Each of these could almost be their own full segment. So if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out. But we're going to talk about breaking news. We're going to talk about links. We're going to talk about evergreen content, which is so important. We're going to talk about QDF, which I'll tell you what, David, I had to look that up and go through all those slides to figure out exactly what you're talking about. And we're going to talk about Twitter and Google. And without further ado, I turn it over to Mr. David Stone.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for having me back. So, hey, everybody. Look forward to talking to you again. As Tim was saying, I'm going to share about 5 tips. I'm going to throw a lot at you in this session. I'm just maybe 1 or 2 things that you can go away and maybe think about how you could implement there in your market. The first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about breaking news. I wanted to come back to that. We had touched on this story in one of the previous sessions and how Sarasota had done a really good job of really getting some good information regarding breaking news. And me personally, just working with newspapers, this is something that I still get excited about because I think it's kind of like the old days of breaking a story for print. You can try to break this story online. And I want to show some things that I think that happen with this story, as well as maybe give you a few tips regarding your breaking news protocol. But this story was the first story that went out regarding Melissa Howard. We had talked about headline optimization, and I showed how the person wasn't quite prominent, so it didn't make it into the headline. While I do recommend full names as a best practice in the headline, they did get it there in the first paragraph in a very prominent position, and you will see that that's a good idea, and I really like how they did that. But talking about breaking news, kind of things that I think about. Be first and be fast. When you have a story that has the potential to be, let's say, bigger than just local, and it can go regional, state, national, you want to beat that competition. And one reason it's important to be first and be fast, I've heard Google say in the past that they really do try to understand, for Google News' sake, who had that story and who broke the story. And so that can be something that can really help you, especially when you're working to be in your local market. And a story gets big, like Melissa Howard, this Melissa Howard email story, and then you have the Washington Post, you have CNN, you have the New York Times, you have these big dogs in our industry coming in to report this story.
And by the way, they have these tips and tricks. So if you don't think through some of this stuff, they're going to use a lot of it on you, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And even in this story, I don't have those slides there, but I could show you how they were definitely using the best practices.
Right.
And it's really hard for a local paper, even though you are a local authority, to compete sometimes with that national authority. And when you be fast and you own that story, Google really does respect that. And then write headlines that closely match a user's query in Google. I mentioned google.com/trends. It's real-time data. So you can go see what people are even starting to search and see how that story is shaping up online. And then lastly, vote for your own content with internal linking, and I'm going to show you an example of where that was done very well. So again, be fast, be first. Here's Google Trends. Melissa Howard hasn't happened much, and then all of a sudden it's not really trending in Google, and now it's really trending in Google. And again, I'm just pulling this from Google Trends. So one of the reasons I think Sarasota did such a great job, and why they were able to get get a lot of top Google was this right here. When you go to google.com/trends and you search for Melissa Howard, this was at the beginning, and it may have even changed now, and you scroll to the bottom, they will give you some queries that are some search terms, some keywords that they are associating with that story, with the Melissa Howard email story. And when I went to Melissa Howard and I scrolled to the bottom and I looked at rising queries, you notice number 4 is the Sarasota Herald Tribune.
Nice.
And so that's a big-time hat tip. That means you were so in front of that story that Google knows that the Tribune is an authority on this particular story based off of the expertise that you're showing. And I just thought that was huge. And that is, I would say, on this particular story, one of the most important factors of them getting traffic. And so, again, when you have that story, be fast, be first. If you think it's a scenario where other people, you're competing to break that story, and it's the difference between getting out a first couple graphs or writing a more fleshed out story,
right. I
would actually recommend go ahead and publish that. Let Google pick up that story, and then add your updates as you have them. And I will actually show an example of that with this story. So a part of the reason Sarasota, I think, was so successful is that they were out in front of the story so much that actually other newspapers were citing them as an authority.
Yep.
This is the Washington Post linking back to some content regarding Melissa Howard, links being one of the top 3 most important factors in how Google ranks content, and that's not my terminology. That's something that they're on record about. Here's Cincinnati.com, an AP story, again, getting links. So the story got out fast. There was authority around it. Other newspaper sites, other authorities picked that up and linked back to it. Good job. Write SEO-friendly headlines. Here's another example, the Columbus Dispatch, the Urban Meyer story still going on, and the Dispatch has just done a wonderful job of writing headlines. Urban Meyer, Gene Smith, Zach Miller, all the people associated. When I'm seeing those stories, they're just doing a real phenomenal job of that, and that's an important factor because, as I showed in the last session, Google's on the record about, hey, that headline, that page title is something that's very important to us.
In fact, I put that in one of the opening slides. Today's the breaking news headline was Ohio State suspends Urban Meyer, Gene Smith. And we talked about this briefly. I mean, it's so important that you get all that in there and not get cute. And they've had a really great week because of this, all the Urban Meyer coverage, right?
Yeah, they've had a great several weeks. It's looking like a great month for them. I know that first week was the best search week they had in something like 16 months.
Wow.
And so just really a good job. One way I describe that headline is it's kind of like you need that literal descriptive text of what people are looking for, as if it's the address of the home. The home is the story. The address is where it's located. When people are searching that query, Google wants to match that address as closely as they can. And as I said, when you match it, it often influences click-through rate. Google is aware of that. So just a lot of good reasons to optimize your headlines for search. And I just wanted to give some background on, so what I'm looking at is Google Search Console last 3 months for Dispatch.com for just keywords that included Urban Meyer. And you can see that trend line, if you actually hover over it, which I can't because this is a slide, they were getting traffic. But look at how well they have played to what is trending in their market by writing so much Urban Meyer content. They've averaged in the top 3 positions since they're about July 29th, and they brought in over 70,000 clicks from Google. That's just for Urban Meyer-related queries, not the secondary queries like Zach Miller, the other people involved, but just for Urban Meyer. That's how much traffic Google has sent to them, and a big part of that is headlines. And then also vote for your own content by linking it together. Again, the dispatch, I talked about this in some leaders' calls, I know, but I wanted to show this slide. They just did a phenomenal job of linking within the body of the story. I know there's related links and things like that. Those count. Google's aware of them. Google knows that they're there. But it is believed, and I believe, that putting those links within the story, it really kind of ties all of your content together and really shows expertise, authority, and trust, which is something that Google is looking for. So some takeaways on that: be fast and be first, write headlines that closely match a user's query in Google, and then vote for your own content with internal linking. So kind of think about that in your breaking news protocol, and when a story has the potential to get bigger, just do your best to get out in front of it. Number 2, I mentioned using links. I wanted to kind of show you some examples of what I mean by that. The content, the links, and then RankBrain, which honestly I don't think anybody that doesn't work at Google really knows what that means, are the top 3 ranking factors. And so I want to touch on links. Why links are important is it helps search engines with discoverability. Actually, how one of the main ways that Google finds content is to crawl links on web pages to discover new content. And because that is so, they actually pass link equity, or what they would call a page rank, from that piece of content to the linked to piece of content. And they call that page rank. And as I said, it's a top 3 ranking factor. And for us, it's like voting for your own content. They really appreciate when you link internally to your content. Here's a couple of, these are from, I've pulled from Google's website. Ranking in Google News is determined based on a number of factors, including just reading the underlined bolded part. Factors include other relevant sites linking to your site, and descriptive and accurate title and alt tags in your article's code. And then on site page and quality, reading the underlined red part. One of these signals is PageRank, one of Google's first algorithms, which looks at links between pages to determine their relevance. Google is very aware of links, and it is a big ranking factor for them still. And Stacy Chan, who used to be user-facing for Google News, she's still at Google, but I know she's moved on somewhere else. I was in a meeting one time, and this is what she said, is about doing good journalism because other sources link to your site. I showed you some previous examples of how important that can be. But there is external links, which you can try and influence, but you can't control, meaning Washington Post linked to Sarasota. There's ways that you can try and influence that, being out in front of the story, being the person that owned that story so people will link to you. But then there's also internal links. They do not pass as much link equity as believed as external links, but internal links can help you rank your own content. And I would like to show you an example of that. So a few years ago at the Statesman, this is Austin 360, the Statesman entertainment site, the newsroom came to me and said, hey, we have this holiday page. We're getting ready for Christmas. And right now it's not doing a lot of traffic. So I went and did some research, and it was actually ranking in on page 5 of Google. So it was like quadruply dead. People could not find it at all. It just was not doing a lot of search traffic. And so I put a little quick and easy strategy around this holiday section page. So I optimized the page title for what people were looking for, which was they were actually looking for Austin Christmas content.
Okay.
And whereas Holiday Guide was, that Holiday Guide is at national. It's not specific. And so I made it the Austin Christmas Guide and we had this conversation, is it Christmas or is it holiday? And people were looking for Christmas content. So that's what we went with because it was Christmas. Then I went and I linked from old stories. So these were not new stories. These were old stories. And this is something interesting about search. Just because a story is a year old does not mean it has no value.
Right.
In fact, it could have a lot of value in Google's eyes because it has PageRank. Because if that story was popular, people did what? They linked to it. That gave it high PageRank. And now I want to take that story that page rank, that link equity, and I want to push it by linking to the holiday guide, giving it link equity. So this Christmas vacation quiz, this pops up almost every Christmas. It's an old story, but people start searching for the Griswold, and actually it was a really smart evergreen play.
Yeah.
So built links. Here's another story. In the body of the story, used Christmas-related anchor text or holiday-related anchor text. So what we did, we updated the page title when needed. We put links inside the stories, and we built topically related, meaning Christmas-related content across the site.
But I think that's such an important piece. You're using, and I think part of that is the institutional knowledge to know what you've done in the past or know who may have written something about these specific topics in the past, right? I mean.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, and I have a tip here at the end, for me, the way I have to find it is looking at analytics. But the people that write this, what I've found is I just have found go ask the people, go ask the reporter, because they know. They're like, oh, yeah, I did this, last year. And so when you're creating this content and it's a beat that you write about or something that you write about often, think about if there's any older content that has value that you can help support that new content, because this does work. It works amazingly well. So basically we did that, and within 24 hours we went from page 5 to top 3 of page 1 in Google. Wow. Literally overnight the change was made. We were ranking in Google for about 10 keywords. We ended up ranking for dozens of keywords just by giving it a little, in slang terms we call it link juice, but basically just voting for our own content. And this is Omniture, which is the analytics platform we were working on at the time. You can see the arrow where we actually made those changes and the hockey stick, and you do your SEO dance anytime you see the hockey stick like that. So it works like this. It works like this often. Another example, people in Austin and tourists are always going to the Congress Bridge to see the bats. We took some bat content that was older content and packaged it together. We linked it together. And you can see here in Google Analytics, sessions went up 230%. I don't remember the time range on that, but it went from 3,000 sessions to 10,000 sessions. Pages a session went up 66%. And overall was 21,000 page views, 42% coming from search traffic. And again, we just paid it a little attention, some of this older content.
Is this something that we as newspaper organizations have been, really bad at? I mean, considering when you look at other entities, folks who push out entire sections at once, we have so much content, but we don't really typically organize it in a way where people who want one thing will go, oh, yeah, well, I would also love to know about this and this and this. And this.
Well, I think it varies. Honestly, from newspaper to newspaper, but I will say this. What I found is, breaking news and what's next is what's important in newspaper, right? What's my next story? And I can really respect that. But I'm going to talk about evergreen content next. I think there's something to be said of there's this wealth of content. Newspaper sites are large. There's a lot of content, and you may have forgotten about it, but Google might not have. And I think there's a way that you can use this content. And a good way to do it is building links.
Real quick question. Our CMS, and I know you're not in it yet, it lets us do some related content into our own stories, and I am taking a question from the field. It adds the stories in a little widget labeled related content. You click, and it brings you to the URL. That's different than a hyperlink. Sounds like you're focusing on hyperlinks. Which one is better? Do the related content links help if they're in the middle of a story, or is that not the case?
So, it's a very good question. For me, I like anchor text, hyperlinks within the body of the story, but I will say Google is very aware of the related links.
Okay.
It's going to find them. Right rail links. Google's crawling and understanding all those links. But what is believed is that links within the story, especially links within the first few paragraphs, just think about it. If you're linking there, it's probably because it's pretty important to the story. And Google's aware of that. It's very intuitive and smart about that. And the words that you use are also important.
I will say, too, with the related links piece, that's such an easy ad because the way you go through Edit UI, you just search for a specific word and you can put multiple links in, so you could do both fairly easily. But okay, great question. Thank you.
So for links, there's a lot more I could say about this, but basically just vote for your own content. By linking related content together, you can pass on that link equity and consider linking within the body of the story, which was, there are related links. I think those do work. I think it's my belief that links directly in the body of the story work best. SEO tip number 3, evergreen. Kind of talking about this already, showing you some examples. So what do we do when breaking news is not happening? We find evergreen content to kind of stuff in the cracks, to keep those page views moving, to keep site traffic up. And evergreen content is a great way to do that. And again, quick headline quiz. Here's this is just always a big performer for us. Matthew Odoms does our top restaurants, and they're always very successful. But if you're an SEO expert, what would you do to this headline?
Austin.
Yeah.
Missing that word.
Missing that word. So that's right. We just updated that to have Austin because that geolocation, it seems so simple, but it can be so important. So we freshened that up a little bit, did some work on it, and that's where we did it.
Boom.
And I know some of you out there are like, is this for real? I mean, seriously? And yes, it's for real. And
that's all it took.
And that's what is a little SEO best practice. That's it.
This is where you do that SEO happy dance.
That's where you do the SEO.
That's why we only use slides and not videos for this, because nobody wants to watch anybody do their SEO happy dance.
That's
do it
right.
in private.
But so people who have watched me do presentations, like people at the Austin American Statesman, I do have a GIF called a crying Oprah.
Yes.
And this would be a crying Oprah because when good SEO happens, Oprah cries. Most people don't know that, and it's a real sweet cry. But that's how I feel inside when I see things like this. But so when you see a piece of content like this evergreen go up, and that's pure search traffic right there. Google's aware of it. So what do you want to do? You've got it going up. You want to support other related content. So what we did is we built a link within that top Austin restaurant story to time for brunch. This was a very old piece of content. It was like from 2010. This was like 3 or 4 years later. We noticed that Google still had an awareness of it. We went in, made sure that it was still up to date so we weren't giving people a bad experience.
Restaurants that had closed or something along those lines. Sure.
Exactly.
Right.
We then put an editor's note, hey, this is an older piece of content. We're updating it just to let you know we checked it. It's still valid. And then we linked to it. And so here's the piece of content, top places for brunch in Austin. I might would have put Austin closer, front load the headline,
sure.
But I thought it was good enough. You can see the editor's note maybe a little bit, and then we updated the timestamp, QDF. I'll talk about that later. So we did that, and there's where we did it. And this store, I don't know, this now, so you see the red, it had done 140,000 page views post making those changes, and you can see the hockey stick on that. That broke 220,000 pages probably a couple years ago, and it's still getting traffic this week.
Wow.
So I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of page views it's done, but it's still going. So think about that old content that still may have evergreen value. So takeaways, fill the traffic gaps. When breaking news isn't happening, optimize evergreen content for search by applying best practices for high search volume content, because there's these people, your market, you're the expert there. You know what people are looking for. It may be parks. It may be beaches. It may be libraries.
The Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Whatever it is.
You know what it is.
Sure.
And so think about that. And one tip, if you don't know, look at a year or 2 years of analytics to find potential. What I mean by that is if you have an analytics tool that you know how to use, and I believe this is more digital folks that we have on the call, go look at search traffic, landing pages for like a 2-year history. and see what pops up. You'll often be surprised by it. You're like, I had no idea this was still getting search traffic, because we tend to look at the 24, 48-hour or week traffic, and we often forget about the 12-month traffic.
Sure.
And there's stories that are actually going to fall in your top 20 that you had no clue in search. If you go look, and there's potential there.
Interesting question from the field. Someone asking, sometimes we use straight URL redirects. So when we have one of those exterior template stories that's a long-form piece of journalism, sometimes we've just been doing a straight URL redirect from. So what does that do to Google, good or bad?
So there's some technical implications there. I believe that's more like what I would call a vanity URL, and it's more for simplicity, and I get that. So what's happening there is a 301 redirect, and in this CMS, I believe that is what's occurring. I have seen that before. I always like direct links, but this is a recent change in Google. It was believed that 301 redirects had about like link equity. I've talked about that. There was a dilution, like 15 to 20%. So it didn't pass as much link equity. They have since come back in the last year and said actually 301 redirects pass it all.
Oh.
So there's a time and a place where I think that makes sense. But I still, even for there's a speed factor, because now there's a redirect, meaning there's a server side redirect taking place. So I just like to link directly. But in some cases, I think that makes sense, and I would say, talk it through and then go with your gut, honestly, is what I would say there.
Perfect.
Query deserves freshness. QDF, like I said, I'm throwing some stuff at you. So what is query deserves freshness? This is Amit Singhal. He used to be head of Google Search, and a direct quote from him, the QDF solution revolves around determining whether a topic is hot, if news sites or blog posts are actively writing about a topic. I mean, again, this is right in our wheelhouse, right? News sites. The model figures that it is one for which users are more likely to want current information. So Google's into finding who has the latest current information. The model also examines Google's own stream of billions of search queries. So I'm going to take you through this, going back to this Melissa Howard story, because Alan there in Sarasota and I we had a conversation, so I appreciated him pointing this out to me, because I was able to kind of follow this and grab some screenshots, and I just wanted to share this because I think it's pretty interesting. So I don't remember what day this was, but I believe these are screenshots from my phone, and I believe at the top that's 5:11 p.m., and you can see for Melissa Howard's Sarasota Tribune is there at the top. And now at 5, I think that's 54 p.m. I can't see this very well on the screen, but Washington Post has now come to the top story there on the carousel on a mobile phone. So this is like 5:54. So looking at that story at 5:13, and you're not going to be able to see this, I just know what it is. This is the story. At 5:13 is when they actually released that story. So remember, Google is looking for trending stories and who has fresh content. So at 5:14, that was really fresh. So they put it in the top stories, and so the Sarasota story actually was bumped out of that top slot.
It was still in. It was still to the right there in the second one.
Correct.
But, yeah, but it was bumped out of number 1.
Right.
Okay.
But then at 5:26. Zach Anderson came back and made an update to that story.
Okay.
You can see at 5:26, he made an update to the Herald Tribune story. And then at 8:01 p.m. that night, Sarasota Herald Tribune is now back in the top slot.
Gotcha.
And so what I believe we're seeing right there is fresh factor. Google's wanting the fresh content. We already saw that Sarasota was already an authority on this story. Washington Post posted a story that was fresher than Sarasota's was. Then Sarasota comes back and updates the story. Sometime in that time frame, Google comes back, looks at that story, and says they have a fresh update and move them back to the top slot. And that is almost in real time. I believe what you're seeing is query deserves freshness.
And again, I want to make, because I think it's such an important point, if you don't stay on top of this through a story like this, you're looking at HuffPost and Daily Beast. I mean, you're not looking, this is not your local TV station that's going to overtake you here. These are the big boys who are looking at this stuff all day long. So if you're not doing that, they're gonna, a great job by Sarasota to fall out and then go back on top. That's very difficult to do.
It is difficult to do, and again, sometimes, you're just trying to get on page one. You're trying to get in that top 5, and you're not always going to beat them out because they are very good and they're very powerful. But like getting out in front of it, making updates when you have them, making sure you get query deserves freshness at play because Google likes fresh content. Making updates to a story, breaking or evergreen sends a positive signal to Google. So if you have an update, make it, and if you need to change the headline, I would say change the headline too. Okay. That's okay, and Google will come and they will know that happened.
We're obviously up to 1:30. We're going to go a little long today, but I think it's important. Some great questions rolling in. Can you game the system and not change anything but the timestamp?
So that's I wonder if that person asking that question has any SEO knowledge. So that is,
I doubt it.
So regarding query deserves freshness, Google has talked about this a little bit. So I have seen studies, and I have seen it happen. So, yes, I have seen that work. I have absolutely seen that work.
And I'm just kidding, Nicole Simmons. Of course you do. Okay, another quick question. Sometimes we lose our Google traffic when we update. Is that solely because the headline evolves, or is there such a thing as updating too often?
I don't think so, because keep in mind, Google has to accept and know that change. Google, we almost think of them as godlike. They're all places at all times.
Yes, they are.
But in actuality, that's what they have. What's called a spider that comes and crawls the web pages. So they actually have to come back, and because of that fresh factor, they know these stories are fresh. They will crawl them more often than, let's say, an evergreen page that they know only changes once every, or may never change.
Right.
So they'll crawl those stories more often. I will say the headline, like if you take Melissa Howard out of the headline, and that was a prominent person now, that could impact you. And I've seen that happen.
Okay. Before. Interesting. Thank you for the question, folks.
I'm going to go back, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go as fast as I can. Regarding query deserves freshness, I have seen changing the timestamp. I've also seen people do this effectively, like change the year in the headline, 2018, best restaurants, 2017, best restaurants, 2018. But Google has said, at least I don't want to say Google, but John Mueller, who's kind of the webmaster, he's kind of one of the more vocal Googlers, has said, that's not really passing on anything good to your user. Right. He didn't say it didn't work. He just said, we're aware that people do that. So think about that. This one will be real quick. I just wanted to share, if you didn't know this, Twitter and Google. Shout out to Michelle there at the Dispatch. This is her tweet getting indexed on page 1 of Google for Urban Meyer investigation.
Rock on. Behind Brett McMurphy, who was the reporter who broke the entire scandal.
The guy that broke the entire story.
Nice work, Michelle.
And then she put a link to one of the Buckeye Extra stories. And so just wanted you to be aware that you can do this. Like, my tweet game is weeks off, okay? It's bad. I was able to do this when Google started indexing tweets. I was able to get multiple tweets indexed for local things that were happening where, again, that query deserves freshness, they'll sometimes pop in those tweets. I was able to get my tweets indexed on page 1 of Google for things fairly easily. So just something to think about. Some best practices. If you tweet, paste a link, why not get some traffic back to your site potentially? And what I have found for that is SEO keyword best practices within your tweet actually do apply. That's how they're figuring it. And this I can't prove, but this is just, again, from observing this a long time, that I think if you work at the Dispatch, like I would have @Statesman.
That's what I was just going to ask you. So should we be embedding our own handles into this stuff?
Like in your
tweet.
Well, on Twitter, that @Statesman, they can definitely that works. But I'm saying, at my Twitter handle, it's like, I'm David, I love Texas barbecue, blah 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 blah, and I work at the Statesman.
Oh, I see.
I actually, because they can then tie that to
bio.
a newspaper.
In your bio.
And that makes you kind of an authority, right? And
Interesting.
Google's in the expertise, authority, and trust. So Closing this out real quick, takeaways, breaking news, be fast, be first, links, important ranking factor, place the links in the body of the text, but most importantly, just make sure you're voting for your own content.
Sure.
Evergreen content, update it, link it together, fill the traffic gaps when breaking news isn't happening.
A really interesting thing, I mean, ask around in your newsroom for folks who've previously written about these topics. We often change beats, and folks have, that did something previously might be real willing to step up and say, of course, I did that story 2 years ago. Interesting.
Yep. QDF, query deserves freshness, is a real thing. It's important in newspaper because we work on so many things that all of a sudden it's not a thing. Now it's a big thing. So also don't be afraid to update older content. Google likes it. Change the headline, page title if needed. And then Twitter and Google, if you tweet, paste the link. And as I said, best practices apply.
Okay, Nicole, hogging the chat box, and I appreciate that. You said the words, you link matter. I tend to link smaller chunks of text so it isn't all distracting before I realized the power of these hyperlinks anyway. So the Massachusetts Department of Transportation released a report that said XYZ. I would have just linked report. Sounds like I should include the entire department name or whatever else instead.
Spot on. Okay, so there is actually documentation at Google that they discussed this, and honestly I knew I was going to give you all a lot, so I couldn't get all my slides in. But short descriptive text.
Okay.
So yeah, that's more helpful than link, than report, click here. Because they use that anchor text to understand. And in my own testing, what I found is that when you link out using that, it can actually help that story rank for that particular anchor text for your story. So yeah, that's a great question.
Excellent stuff. If you have more questions, please feel free to either send them to me, send them to David. We'd be happy to make sure that they get an answer. It really makes such an impact, and I said this before on last week's call, knowing what you have in terms of the content that you've already created and being able to use that again when we're talking about resources being where they are, when we're talking about having to drive traffic in our newsrooms, why not already use the stuff that you have in your arsenal rather than recreating everything? Not to say that you don't want new, fresh content as often as possible.
Sometimes you'll do that too.
Of course, but use the stuff that you already have. I will send the link to the video, the link to the slides. I'll tell you what, you have, my friend, been the busiest and most registered participant that we've had on our webinar series.
Well, that's awesome.
Big shot. You're a big shot.
I don't know about that. I'm just happy to be here. I really like this stuff. When you apply it, nothing works 100% of the time, but these best practices do work, and when it happens, it feels like magic, and I love it. I'm happy to be here. I look forward to working with everyone and helping out where I can. Thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks, folks. Have a great day, and thank you for taking part. Like I said, I'll get this all out to you just within the hour or so. Thank you so much.